When you think of a constitution, you probably picture some dry, dusty legal document, right? Well, the Meiji Constitution of Japan was anything but. It was actually the explosive result of this fierce intellectual battle, a real clash of ideas, over the very soul of a nation that was just stepping onto the world stage. And that's the story we're diving into. So, picture this. It's the late 19th century. Japan has just thrown its doors open after hundreds of years of isolation. It has to modernize, and it has to do it fast. But how? How do you even start? The country's greatest minds were locked in this huge debate over three totally different paths forward, and the choice they were about to make would shape Japan for the next 100 years. To get our heads around this high-stakes debate, we don't need some dense political textbook. Nope. Instead, we can look at the super popular novel from the time, called A Discourse by Three Drunkards on Government. It's this brilliant, clever allegory that just perfectly captures the three competing philosophies that were wrestling for control of Japan's future. Okay, so these three characters just lay out the whole debate perfectly. First up, you've got the Western scholar. This guy is all about French-style democracy, freedom, equality. He even argues that Japan doesn't need a military at all. Then, on the complete other end of the spectrum, you have the heroic gentleman. For him, national strength is everything. His vision, build a massive army and expand out onto the continent. And then, trying to find some common ground, there's Dr. South Sea. He represents the author's middle path. Yeah, we need a military for self-defense now, but the ultimate goal should be democracy down the road. Now, this wasn't just some story in a book, oh no. These three drunkards were perfect stand-ins for the actual political factions that were popping up all across Japan. Each one was fighting for its own vision for the nation, taking this fictional debate and turning it into a very real political struggle. So let's connect the dots here. The Western scholars' ideas about people's rights, that was basically the Liberal Party, and they were looking at France as their model. The more moderate, middle-of-the-road approach, the one favoring a British-style constitutional monarchy, that was being pushed by Okuma Shigenobu and his Reform Party. And the heroic gentleman's focus on a powerful state? Well, its real-world counterpart was Ito Hirobumi's group, who were seriously impressed by the strong, centralized government of Germany. So after all that debate, who came out on top? Well, it was Ito Hirobumi's vision. He and his team got the job of actually drafting the Constitution. But, and this is absolutely crucial, their goal was not to just copy and paste Germany's constitution. Not at all. They wanted to create something that was uniquely Japanese, blending these Western ideas with their own ancient traditions. And this is where things get really fascinating. This kicked off one of the most incredible intellectual projects of the time. The drafters had to figure out how to make a German political theory feel, well, Japanese. Their journey took them from the cutting-edge legal thinking in Berlin all the way back to the mythological origins of Japan itself. Okay, so the big idea Ito brought back from Germany was this thing called state organicism. Now, forget the Western idea of a social contract, where people agree to give power to a government. This theory sees the state as a single living organism. Every single part of society, from the emperor down to the farmer, was a vital part of one body, all working together. The easiest way to think about it is like a human body. The emperor is the symbolic and moral heart of the nation. The government is the brain, making all the decisions. And the people are the arms and legs, carrying out all the work. It's not about a hierarchy of who's in charge, but about how all the parts work together to keep the whole body healthy. And this idea really resonated with traditional Japanese ways of thinking. So to find the Japanese heart for this new state body, one of the main drafters, a guy named Inoue Kawashi, basically became an intellectual detective. He dove deep into the Kojiki, one of Japan's oldest texts. And what he found was incredible. He discovered that for most of Japanese history, the emperor's power wasn't actually political, it was symbolic. The emperor was a moral and spiritual center, separate from the day-to-day grind of governing. And Inoue boiled this whole ancient concept down to one single, incredibly elegant word: shirasu. Now, this doesn't mean to rule like a king rules. It means something more like to oversee or to be informed of. It describes a monarch who reigns as a symbol, a unifying figurehead, while the real political power is held by the government. It was the perfect Japanese equivalent for the European idea of a constitutional monarch. So, Inoue had found the perfect word. He had brilliantly woven together German theory and ancient Japanese tradition. It seemed like the puzzle was solved. But in the very final moments of drafting, a single edit was made. one word was changed. And that single change would have profound and ultimately tragic consequences for the future of Japan. Okay, look at this. This is the original draft of the most important article in the entire Constitution, Article 1. Notice that key word. The Empire of Japan shall be reigned over, or shirasu, by a line of emperors. This wording sets up a symbolic constitutional monarchy, exactly like Inoue wanted. And the weight of this one word choice, it's massive. Shirasu means symbolic authority, a monarch who's kept informed but stays above politics. Tochi, on the other hand, means to rule or to govern. That implies direct, hands-on political power. The difference is like night and day. It would change everything. And then, this is the final version. Ito Hirobumi himself steps in and makes the change. He swaps out shirasu for tochi. So now, Article 1 reads that the emperor would reign over and govern. Just like that, on paper, the emperor went from being a symbolic figurehead to an absolute sovereign with direct political power. So why does this matter so much? Because it created this incredibly dangerous ambiguity. See, Ito's private notes and commentaries made it clear he still intended the emperor to be symbolic. But who reads the private notes, right? People read the Constitution, which now made it look like the emperor had absolute power. And then phrases like sacred and inviolable, which were meant to put the emperor above politics, got twisted to mean he was a god who couldn't be questioned. This Tochi version is what got taught in schools for generations, building this powerful national myth that was a far cry from what the drafters had originally intended. So at the end of the day, what was this Constitution? It was a complex and, for its time, pretty brilliant creation. It was not just a copy of Germany. It was a sophisticated blend of German state theory, ancient Japanese tradition, and one other key ingredient we haven't talked about yet: British conservatism. This quote from the British philosopher Edmund Burke really captures that third influence perfectly. A young Japanese intellectual named Kaneko Kantaro, who had actually studied at Harvard, brought Burke's conservative ideas into the mix. Burke's whole thing was arguing against radical change like the French Revolution. He believed that tradition is basically the collected wisdom of a people, and you should respect it and only change it slowly and carefully. So there you have it, the three big intellectual pillars holding up the Meiji Constitution. You've got the German idea of the state as one body, the British conservative respect for tradition, and the uniquely Japanese concept of a symbolic emperor, which they dug up from their own ancient texts. So when you really look at it this way, it's obvious this was no cheap imitation. It was an original, deeply thoughtful creation, a masterful blend of foreign and domestic ideas. The men who wrote it were, in good faith, trying to build a modern state that was still authentically Japanese, one that could stand on its own in a very dangerous world. And all this leaves us with a final, really difficult question, doesn't it? Given the intellectual brilliance that went into creating it, but also the tragic ambiguity that helped lead to disaster down the line, how do we judge this document? Do we evaluate it based on the world its creators lived in, or do we judge it by the world it helped create? That's definitely something to think about.